You are probably already also exposed to this concept of osmosis. In usual language, it's used as acquiring knowledge by osmosis, by being around people who are always emanating knowledge and wisdom, right? Or when you drink these bottled waters, especially in a country like India where most people rely on bottled waters, it's written as something that is purified with reverse osmosis. Okay, so what is osmosis? Basically, when you have a body fluid, or for example, or a solution that has something dissolved in it, and a membrane, a semi-permeable membrane between them, like the cell membrane, then you have high concentration of the dissolved material on one side and low concentrations, high concentration on this side and low concentration on this side. So you have what is called hypertonic or high salinity and hypotonic or low salinity, and you have a semi-permeable membrane in the middle. The most critical thing to remember about osmosis as opposed to diffusion: diffusion is about moving down the gradient from high concentration because of molecular collisions, random motions, getting mixed up over time, whereas here is the osmotic pressure, it's called. So the solution moves from low concentrations of dissolved material to high concentrations. Why? Because there is more water on the side which has low dissolved material than the other side. So hypotonic solution has more water molecules, fewer salinity salt molecules than hypertonic solution. So water molecules move from less concentrated to more concentrated solution. Okay, this sounds a little bit confusing, but it's not confusing if you remember that less concentrated solution has more water than the dissolved matter, and high concentrated solution has more dissolved matter in it. So water goes from where there are more water molecules to where there are fewer molecules. Reverse osmosis basically means you put pressure and make the water go from high concentrated solution to low concentrated solution, so you are removing the dissolved matter and extracting water molecules. Nonetheless, here is an animation that is showing different solutions. So it's showing low sugar instead of the salt, so high water concentration, and here there is high sugar, so low water concentration. So water molecules are going across this selectively permeable or semi-permeable membrane, where water molecules are being allowed to go across, but sugar molecules are not allowed to pass. Okay, so you basically move water from low concentration solution into high concentration solution. Okay, that's the osmotic pressure. That's all you have to remember. Okay, so osmosis is basically trying to create isotonic water, like diffusion was trying to diffuse everything and equalize the gradient. Here you're equalizing the gradient across a semi-permeable membrane, so you're moving water molecules across and making equal number of water molecules on either side, equal concentration solution on either side. So hypertonic is when seawater has lower salinity than the organism's fluid. So organisms have fluid inside, we have fluid inside. It has certain dissolved materials which are salt in the ocean. Fish have salt in their body fluids as well. And hypotonic is when organisms' fluids have lower salinity than the ocean, which means the osmotic pressure is going to depend on the body fluids concentration of salinity compared to the fluid in which they live. So it's the freshwater fish and the saltwater fish. The osmotic pressure is going to determine whether water molecules are going into the body or being pulled out of the body. This is going to matter, right? If you're going to live in water and either you're constantly accumulating water or constantly losing water, then you have to compensate for it. That's what osmosis is all about. So fish have evolved over time, and they have evolved in certain level of salinity at some time in the past, and they have maintained this evolutionary feature. So freshwater fish, it turns out, are hypotonic, so they have low osmotic pressure, which means water is constantly being absorbed through the skin. Okay, so they are hypotonic, means the salinity concentration is lower than the water. Remember, the fresh water is got very low concentration, so water molecules are more in concentration outside, so the water is constantly being absorbed by osmosis through the skin. So they have to get rid of this water, but they want to make sure that they don't want to lose the body salts. If you lose the body salts, you lose the osmotic balance within the cell. You don't want that, right? So they are losing salt because of this process, and they are absorbing water. So they don't drink too much water to add to this absorption by the skin, and they don't want to keep this water in the body, so they produce large volumes of urine, and they don't want to lose salt, so the urine is very dilute. On the other side, the saltwater fish are hypertonic, so they have high osmotic pressure, so they are always tending to lose body fluids through the skin. So they have to keep drinking large volumes of water, but this water has a lot of salt, so they have to get rid of the salt. They have to keep the water because it's being lost through the skin, and they have to get rid of the salt because it's bringing in too much salt. So they have secretion of salts through the gills and the skin. They have evolved like the plants that live in brackish water, like mangroves, have to get rid of the salt with crystallization on the leaves and so on. That's the same here. So they produce small volumes of urine because they don't want to get rid of the water, but they want to get rid of the excess salt, so the urine is highly concentrated. Okay, sounds confusing, but just stare at it, listen to it, and you will understand. They also have to get oxygen through, so they have various forms of gills they have evolved, so they constantly pass the water through the gills and exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide. Respiration is producing, remember, fish are heterotrophic, so like us, they eat stuff and produce oxygen like we do. We breathe out the oxygen, breathe out the CO2 and take in oxygen. The lungs are doing the work for us, whereas the fish need to breathe the dissolved oxygen, so they need to ingest water, extract oxygen, and get rid of the water, right? So they have these gills, and their gills are taking in the water, extracting dissolved oxygen and getting rid of CO2. So here are some complex structures: water in, gill arch, gill rakes, lamellae, and exchange of water and carbon dioxide and oxygen. So all the fish require certain amounts of dissolved oxygen in the water that I already mentioned in the context of hypoxia and anoxia. So it turns out about 4 ppm. I mentioned milliliters per liter before, but you can also measure it as parts per million by volume. So there is a certain level of dissolved oxygen in waters. When it drops below 4, we call it hypoxic waters. Many fish can move or they will die. If it drops below 2 ppm, it will become anoxic and nobody can live in this water. Okay, so dissolved oxygen levels are important. Adaptation to extracting oxygen and not losing water and salt, so maintaining osmotic pressure, is an adaptation that's very critical for species that live in the water, right? Something to remember.